This is DaveNoseWorthyMMA.
In April 2006, the third installment of The Ultimate Fighter hit the air, and it was at this time that the world was introduced to a then light heavyweight Michael Bisping. The brash-talking Brit initially stood out from the pack early on in the series, primarily for, you guessed it, his brazen, trash-talking ways. I remember watching this season at the time and not at all being a fan of the attitude and really viewing him as a bully. For me, it turned into one of those situations where I was wanting this fighter to take a loss. I didn't want to see a guy that acted in this cocky manner prevail and rise above the rest to become the Ultimate Fighter. We were over 10 years removed from that time, and I mean no disrespect to any of the past contestants or the winners of Tough, but back then, winning the Ultimate Fighter was very meaningful, more so than it's ever been. And I couldn't stand the thought of this guy reaching that pinnacle. So, much to my dismay, not only did the Count dispatch of his opponent in the first fight in the house, he then went on to get a second opponent out of there by stoppage even faster than he did in his first fight. So off to live TV on the Ultimate Fighter finale he goes to take on fellow light heavyweight Josh Haynes. I can remember quite well how I felt going into this fight. Based on his impressive fights he had in the house and the toughness and the durability he put on display, I favored Bisping to get the win that night, and he did just that. At 4 minutes and 14 seconds mark in the second round, the ref called a halt to the bout and Bisping was crowned the Ultimate Fighter and awarded a 6-figure contract with the UFC. I wasn't happy about this fighter becoming someone that I'd be watching on a regular basis from here on out, but I knew once he gets in there with elite talent, he's going to be in some serious trouble. But damn it, I was wrong there. He went on to rattle off 3 decisive victories. While he did have the streak disrupted by a loss to Rashad Evans, it was almost as good as winning 4 in a row, as that was a very close fight that went to a split decision. And many thought that the Count probably should have gotten the nod on that one. When I look back at it, it wasn't so much the skill set that made me think he would have trouble. I just had such disdain for his attitude and the way he carried himself at the time, and I just didn't want to believe that a guy like this was going to have his way in the UFC. So it was exactly 2 years after his introduction to the world of MMA in April of 2008 when Bisping made his middleweight debut, coming off of that loss to Rashad Evans. This ended up being the beginning of yet another 3-fight win streak. After knocking off a few upper echelon middleweights, Bisping earned himself not only a middleweight title eliminator fight against Dan Henderson, but also a gig coaching against his opponent on the very same show he was once a contestant on. I thought I didn't like him as a contestant on Tough, but Michael Bisping as a coach, opposed to Dan Henderson on The Ultimate Fighter, United States versus the United Kingdom, brought things to a whole other level. There wasn't a moment in that season where if the two coaches were in the same room that Bisping wasn't jawing at Henderson. I just remember constantly feeling bad for Hendo as he never really said a word, just sat back and took the verbal assault while the two teams looked on. It was embarrassing to watch, but eventually that season came to an end. Then came that fateful night, UFC 100. This was a huge milestone and the largest event in UFC history at the time, and there was a real big event feel for this pay-per-view. I remember talking to friends leading up to this event and saying how I hope Bisping gets his for all the disrespect he showed Hendo and Team USA. I felt strongly about this. And well, we all know how the story goes. Bisping ended up being on the receiving end of one of the most devastating knockouts in MMA history. The kind of knockout that was so bad that even despite how strongly I opposed his behavior and how much I rooted against him, I felt bad about how that turned out. The MMA world was left in awe. If the initial overhand right wasn't bad enough, the follow-up diving right hand made matters and the visual all the more violent and hard to watch. And though it was the result I thought I wanted at the time, I didn't want that kind of harm for Bisping or anybody. Suffering that kind of defeat on the biggest stage in the world is devastating no matter which way you look at it. A loss like that can not only change the path of a fighter's career, but it could change the path of a person's life. So needless to say, I was interested to see how the next chapter for the Count would unfold. Cut to 4 months later, on November 14th, 2009, Bisping is set to have his first fight since the traumatic loss in his hometown of Manchester, England of all places. The pressure on that man's shoulders would have been immense no matter where the location. But the fact that his first fight back was in his own backyard increased that pressure tenfold. Having been following his career for over 3 years at that point, I was intrigued to say the least. especially considering the UFC wasn't lobbing him a softball. His opponent, Dennis Kang, was a very dangerous striker. Round 1. Bisping takes to the center of the octagon in an aggressive manner. The tomb circle and boom! Kang lands a right hand to the temple of Bisping, dropping the count and following up by jumping on top of him and throwing punches from the guard. And while Bisping was active and protecting himself on the ground, Kang spent the rest of that round just landing shots to the dome repeatedly. When the horn sounds, the two go to their respective corners. Bisping's corner starts telling him that now is the time when he'll start to take over and to pick up the pace, to which Bisping responds, "What happened?" He had no idea how they ended up on the ground and doesn't remember getting punched. Round 2. The two circle each other at a high pace, but this time it's Bisping scoring that takedown. He just starts raining down punches and the hometown crowd roars. Kang manages to get back to his feet. The two circle again, trading punches, only for Bisping to barrel forward and take down Kang again, this time landing even harder shots from the top and busting up Kang quite a bit. Kang gets back to his feet, but this time on wobbly legs as the crowd in attendance starts to get even louder. So Kang, wobbly, Bisping, determined. The two circle one last time, and then Bisping barrels forward, takes down his foe, and relentlessly lays down blows, throwing punches and knees to the body of his battered opponent, only to have Dan Miragliotta come in and halt the bout with just 30 seconds left in the second round. There are many memorable things about how this fight ended. The crowd reaction was something to behold. The modesty Bisping put on display during his post-fight interview was admirable. And the Count bringing in his son into the octagon to display his own martial arts prowess was an awesome way to cap off the redemption. It was on that night that I started to appreciate Bisping as a mixed martial artist and to become a fan. And since that time, what he has managed to accomplish is equally or even more impressive than the feat of having such an impressive performance after such a devastating loss. He has fought everybody. Vanderlei Silva, Chael Sonnen, Brian Stann, Vitor Belfort, Tim Kennedy, Kung Lee, Luke Rockhold, Anderson Silva. Not to mention, he got a second crack at Dan Henderson and avenged that loss. He has lost some, but won most. Never mind the fact that 10 years later, after his UFC debut on just 11 days' notice, he finally gets a shot at one of the most highly regarded middleweights in MMA history and knocks him out in the very first round, becoming the undisputed UFC middleweight champion of the world. What else can I say? Following Michael Bisping's career over the past 11 years has been awesome, and despite the craziness that has taken place over that period of time, things are about to get even crazier on November 4th when he steps in there against Georges St-Pierre to defend his crown. No matter what the outcome of that fight is, Bisping's career is really something to marvel at. The journey has been an amazing one, and we aren't even done yet. While he may be a little up there in age, he is also way up there in the game, and not only the champion, but the best he's ever been. But you know what's really amazing about this whole situation? There is a very real possibility that the best is yet to come.